We've been exploring this practice of mindfulness. This is the last class of this kind of intro course on what the practice of mindfulness is. We'll continue meeting, so we'll be right back here at the same time next week, starting the second course. So nothing's going to change. It's just this is kind of like tying a bow on the first 6 classes of the foundations of mindfulness. And so we've been exploring this practice of mindfulness and its foundations, which can help us establish this practice in our own life. And we've really been learning to be more present for our inner world, the things going on in our body and in our mind, aware of these aspects of ourselves that often go unnoticed or unrecognized by us. And we've been learning to practice in a formal way, in a chair or on the seat or cushion. And we keep that as like a time that we specially designate for meditation. And this is an important part of our practice, to practice formally in this way. But our meditation practice doesn't stop there. We can also bring it out into the rest of our life and the world around us. So this brings us to today's topic, which is bringing our practice into the world. And this is a bit of a continuation of last week's class, where we explored meeting our inner world with compassion and understanding. I shared that the 4th foundation of mindfulness doesn't translate very well from the original Pali language or Sanskrit language, but that it can be understood as being mindful of how we are relating to our inner world, the things going on inside of us, as well as how we are relating to our outer world, our external relationships, and the things going on in the world. Last week, we focused on how to be with things as they arise within us. This week, we'll be focusing more on relating to the outer world. So I want to start with a quote from a mindfulness meditation teacher named Joseph Goldstein. He wrote that, quote, "The great discovery of the meditation journey is that all the world's forces for good and for harm, all the world's forces for good and for harm, are also playing out right here in our own hearts and minds. If we want to understand the world, we need to understand ourselves." Close quote. And so in beginning our practice at the most local level possible, which is ourselves, we begin to understand the world inside of us with wisdom. And this helps us to bring wisdom and understanding to the world around us as well. So everything that we say and do, every action that we take, has consequences. And we often think of consequences as negative, but there can be positive consequences too. And we often think of consequences as being external, but our actions have internal consequences too. We could also just say that every action we take has an after effect. And most of the time we don't notice how caught we are by the hook of our thoughts and emotions, caught in our ignorance and our craving, or our resistance and avoidance. And when we are caught but we don't recognize it, our actions not only reverberate and ripple out into the people and the world around us, but they also reverberate and cause inner ripples within us too. So whether we're practicing on the cushion or out in our normal life, we can begin to recognize when we are caught in our inner narrative, caught up in a feedback loop of thoughts and emotions. If you were here last week, you may recall talking about the room full of violins. And when one violin is played, all the rest of the violins around the room start to resonate and create sound as well. And this analogy helps us to understand how it is for us as humans when our limbic system, kind of this part of our brain stem that runs right up into the bottom of our brain and connects to the amygdala and all this. This is a really old part of our brain, and it's our emotion and motivation center. And so this analogy of the violins helps us to understand how this limbic system part of us resonates with the people around us. So when we help heal ourselves from perpetual dissatisfaction and suffering, at the same time we cease to pass our dissatisfaction and our suffering onto others around us as often. So by creating space for ourselves and helping ourselves to heal, we actually create more space for others, and we can help them to heal and to feel joy too. And this is how our practice literally comes to life, because we're actually sensing that the deepest intention here is that there really is no difference between our practice and the rest of our life. Our practice is our life, and how we live is what we practice. We're always practicing something, so there's nothing for us to work with in our practice but our life. Actually, the word practice itself is deceptive because it makes it sound like there is a designated time where we're to practice being mindful and trying to meditate our stress away and be aware of what's happening in us. And then it's back to the rest of our life getting caught up in the same old stories and caught up in the same old dissatisfaction with our life. But the fact is that each and every action we take is developing some quality of our heart and mind, either watering the wholesome seeds or the unwholesome seeds. So our life is our practice because there's nothing else for us to practice with. Viktor Frankl, he was an Austrian-born neurologist, psychiatrist, and philosopher. And he was also a survivor of several concentration camps during the Holocaust, where he lost his father, mother, his brother, and his wife. And he said, quote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation." He goes on and says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Close quote. But for much of our waking life, we aren't responding, we are reacting. And the more these states of mind appear and are acted upon, the stronger they become. Every time we get angry, we practice anger. Every time we are filled with resentment, we practice resentment. As we've learned from the field of neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So the paths that have been taken are the ones that we will continue to take. Unless we can introduce a pause between stimulus and response, like Viktor Frankl said. Many times we will avoid a situation or a conversation because we're afraid of how we will react, or afraid of the emotion taking control over us, or just afraid of the emotion, so we avoid it. But this isn't living in a wise relationship with our emotions. We may have lived our entire life saying, "I'm angry," and calling it my anger, without ever really realizing how it appears in our body and the kind of stories that tend to come along for the ride. It's not quite personal growth to think that we're doing a good job not getting angry if it's just because we're avoiding anything that might disrupt our emotions. And it doesn't show real progress if we're only not getting angry simply because anger isn't here right now. If every time anger or some other unpleasant emotion appears and we're immediately in its grip, caught on its hook, and hijacked by it, it doesn't show us real progress. What shows real progress in our practice and in our life is whether we can be mindful when an unpleasant thought or emotion is arising, and then not getting caught on the hook of it like a fish taking the bait, but instead we can open up to the space that's here beyond this confined and constricted attention that's stuck on the hook of a thought or an emotion. An American poet and writer named William Carlos Williams. I feel like he had to add his middle name in there because otherwise it would just be William Williams. He said, quote, "Dissonance, if you are interested, leads to discovery," close quote. So many times when we are in the grip of strong emotions, we aren't even aware of our breath, let alone our body or our mind in that moment. With mindfulness practice, we can begin to be like the dog Toto from The Wizard of Oz and peel back the curtain of the great and powerful Oz of our mind and see that it's really all smoke and mirrors and illusions. That we're not the great and powerful wizard controlling our life like we feel we are much of the time. We can start to see the illusion and the mirage for what it isn't, becoming aware of the mechanisms and forces at play that are really driving our behavior. In order to start living our life according to the things that we value and the principles that we may have or want to hold, we begin by watching our body, our mind, and our heart, and seeing how our actions affect us. How do we feel? What qualities does this particular action strengthen? And we can practice paying attention in the midst of very ordinary activities. When you talk with people, do you know what's happening in your mind? We can tune in the same way we practice mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings and of thoughts. We can check and see, are we being mindful and cultivating wisdom and compassion when talking with that person? Or is there a sense of ill will or aversion or resistance present that we feel towards them? Are we aware of breathing in and out and our feet making contact with the ground? Do we need to apply some self-compassion to help the discomfort that we feel in that conversation? So we can learn to work wisely with whatever happens to appear, seeing what this moment has to teach us about our own minds. And this can help us to open to the moment. It won't be perfect every time. Life is not perfect. But this is also why we call it a practice, and why we simply begin again, helping us to meet each moment anew. When you eat or work or walk or talk, do you know what's happening in your mind? What qualities are we strengthening? Many times we might be busy preparing the next bite that we don't even appreciate the bite that's in our mouth. There are millions upon millions of people who would love and appreciate having that bite in their mouth, but we rarely even notice that it's there. We can notice how our actions are affecting others, staying sensitive to the effect our energy is having on them, the kind of music our violin is making and sending out to the other ones in the room. Often we can be so caught up in our own stories or perspective that we don't see the impact we are having with our face, with our words, our body language, our tone of voice, or our text messages. When we apply this practice of mindfulness to our moment-by-moment life, we're learning and training to properly take care of what's happening within us, and also sensing our growing capacity to properly take care of what's happening around us, what's happening around us, and in others as well. To make good use and to be a good steward of our moment-by-moment life. Actually, when we pay close attention, we see that this moment is the only moment we ever really have. It never begins or ends. We never actually go to the future or to the past. Wherever we are and whatever we're doing, it's always happening in this moment. And we can learn to be present and aware of the endless flow of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And when we can notice clearly what is happening in this moment, wisdom can direct our choices and our actions, rather than our ego playing out old habits and patterns in our conditioning. And it takes tremendous courage and awareness to look at ourselves and our life with this kind of interest and openness. We can even notice the influence of subtle motives and intentions behind our actions. Like maybe we do something kind for someone, thinking we are generous and giving, but we're not really aware of the expectations that were underlying that we're lying beneath the surface of our kind act. And so then we get upset or disappointed if they don't react the way we wanted them to. But once we've carefully seen our own mind, we are less prone to judge the mind of others. The more accepting we become of ourselves and our own predicament, the more accepting we are of others. And we can be mindful of our speech just like our thoughts. Do we notice the intentions and motivations of what's behind it? Or are we so caught up in our own thoughts, feelings, and ideas that the words just fall right out? Are we caught on the unpleasant feeling that arose from something they said? Do we immediately get caught on the hook of retaliation and want to make them suffer too? Or can we notice the unpleasant feeling that's present and stand free from it? Are we noticing how much of the time we spend caught in the judgment and criticism of others or of ourselves? Or do we take the bait and we're simply caught on the hook of it? This robs us of our freedom and our joy and a compassionate response. We don't have to allow everything that passes through our mind to have a voice. One teacher from the Thai forest tradition named Ajahn Sumedho said, quote, "Our practice is not to follow the heart, it is to train the heart," close quote. So the heart is not only full of love, kindness, and compassion. It is also driven by desire, greed, anger, and hatred. And depending on our actions, we can water either the wholesome seeds or the unwholesome seeds. So we need to train the heart, not simply follow it. And when we train our heart, we connect with our heart, allowing us to feel more capacity and space, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. It's like Mr. Rogers says at the end of the song, "Won't you be my neighbor?" He says, a neighbor is someone who is close to us. A friend is someone who is close to our hearts. And then he says, I like to consider you my neighbor and my friend. And we can connect to this deepest intention to not just include what we normally exclude within ourselves, but we can also include others in our practice and in our hearts. Our practice will suffer if we are not committed to a basic foundation of the intention not to harm others or ourselves. One teacher visited the US, and a lot of people who were interested in meditation and what it could do for them showed up, and he commented that expecting great reward from our meditation practice without a grounding in right conduct and right action is like trying to row a boat across a river without untying the boat from the dock. And it may seem like a silly example, but we can even notice our desire to kill a bug that we find annoying. Maybe one in our house. We get them all the time. We live in the woods, and we can notice this annoyance in us. We can see how it shows up in our body. We can practice a quick rain practice if you were here last week. We can practice a quick rain practice, recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture to see if we can recognize the discomfort, see if we can allow it to be here because it already is. Investigate how it shows up in the body and just witness the changes in sensation and begin to step outside of the feelings about it. And who knows, maybe we'll help the bug outside. So closing with the quote that we started with from Joseph Goldstein at the beginning. I almost said Joseph Quotestein. Starting with the quote from Joseph Goldstein from the beginning, he says, "The great journey, the great discovery of the meditative journey is that all the world's forces for good and for harm are also playing out right here in our own hearts and minds. So if we want to understand the world, we need to understand ourselves. No one can do this practice for us. And if we don't do it, we will continue to stay stuck in our habit patterns and our conditioning, confined to a limited sense of self. But if we engage with this practice in our daily life, on and off the cushion, we will see that the fruit of transformation, we'll see the fruit and the transformation in our own hearts and minds, and in our relationships, and in our life, and in the world around us. So may we make good use of our life in each moment. May this be of benefit not only to ourselves, but to all those who might come into contact with us. You can do it. You can bear it. Don't forget to be kind to yourself. Thank you for your attention and for your presence.